going to be talking about the three, which is some of Maquoketa's historic B&Bs and Airbnbs. So we thank Don for all his hard work in preparing this and turn the time over to him.
I decided the first thing I'm going to do, since I'm as big as a billboard, blatant plug. Can you see that? My shirt says, muster on the Maquoketa. There, is that better? So everyone is expected to be there and pretend you're Scarlett O'Hara. So the title of today's program is The Three, and I know there's more than three, but I'm going to talk about three of some of Maquoketa's historic B&Bs and Airbnbs, and there is a difference. Everybody know the difference between a B&B and an Airbnb?
No.
A B&B is where the owners are there taking care of you, cooking your meals, all that. An Airbnb is you walk in and pretend you're a squatter. This program was put together for the PEO Club, and I'm still not clear about what PEO actually stands for, except one of the E stands for education. And it was done with an eye on historic preservation, so that's kind of how this is geared. And I am a second generation member of the Jackson County Historic Preservation Commission, meaning I took over from an original member, and that was 30-some years ago. Back then I had hair, actually. And since nobody puts together a program like this on their own, there we go. I have a few thank yous. Robert Abbott, Josh and Brielle Wrights, Nasser and Patricia Shahrivar, Jackson County Historical Society, and Jackson County Historic Preservation Commission. This is what we have, a picture of a National Historic Register plaque. And these are available to people who own historic register properties. So if you have an older property and you get it on the register, you get a plaque to mount wherever you want. We prefer it to be out front. One lady put hers in her guest bathroom. The National Register for Historic Places is the official list of the nation's historic places worthy of preservation. It's authorized by the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 through the National Park Service's National Register of Historic Places. And this is part of a national program that coordinates and with the support of the public and private efforts to identify, evaluate, and protect America's historic and archaeological resources. Our commission deals with brick and mortar preservation, which means not the history, but the actual brick mortar construction is what we're concerned with. The history kind of goes hand in hand, but that's not our primary focus. I'm going to start with, and this is probably a house that you all know. This is 311 South 2nd Street. And this house was placed on the National Register in 1991 and is most commonly known as the Carson House. It is a brick veneer and was built in 1882 by Dr. G.S. Martin. There's a lot of conjecture about what the G actually stands for, but we've narrowed it down to either George or Gano. Between the two, I would pick G. Dr. Martin was one of Maquoketa's first doctors, and he was also a druggist. And he and his wife Lydia came to Maquoketa in 1855 after living 4 years in Lamont. He built the house for, can anybody guess? Not himself. He did not build it for himself. He built it for his niece, Sally Moore, who, if I understand things correctly, never lived in the house. So if you can see my brilliant pointer, this is the 1873 lithograph of Maquoketa, and where it's pointing is the approximate place where the house was built and where it stands today. The lot was purchased by Dr. Martin from John and Sophia Shaw, who were very early settlers. And there's another close-up of the pointer. And the Shaws actually had their log cabin and their lawn and everything right down on the west side of Main Street. So for a long time there was no development in that part of Main Street because it was Mrs. Shaw's front lawn. And this, what he bought from the Shaws, was part of a 160-acre tract purchased by a man by the name of Dr. Salter, William Salter, who was an early physician here in 1845. This is a 1975 photo of the house. The house is Italianate by design, a style which was derived from the medieval Italian villas and farmhouses. It developed as part of the picturesque movement, which showed a preference for asymmetry, variety, and natural landscaping. And this was in full swing by the mid-19th century and helped to grow the popularity of the Italianate style. Irregular floor plans were preferred over earlier plans that championed more rigid and proportioned classical ideals. Due to this flexibility, the style could be applied in equal measures to grand country estates or middle-class row houses. And if anybody's ever been in this house, especially had gone upstairs, and I think Sue, maybe you've been upstairs in that house.
We've owned that house for 5 years.
I know that.
Yes.
I know that. That's why I figured you've been upstairs. The hall upstairs is a long hallway, but it joints in the middle so that the downstairs fireplace in the parlor, the chimney can go up. But it's just a little different design, isn't it? The house is a fine example of the houses built in town for the professional class of people during Maquoketa's economic expansion in the 19th century. Excuse me. And presents a more subdued and conservative appearance than other local Italianate-style homes. And it features dual front porches, and there's conjecture that there may have been a widow's walk or cupola or belvedere on top originally. So, right up here, there has been some conjecture that there was actually a belvedere or widow's walk up there. I have not seen any proof of that, but it would fit with the design. The two-story brick house features a limestone foundation, a dressed stone water table, and a low-pitched hip roof, projecting low-pitched gable wings and simple brackets under the broad eaves. There are 2 porches on the house. The front porch is capped with iron cresting. Many people confuse cupolas and belvederes, which makes a great deal of sense given the fact that they serve very, very similar purposes, which is to ventilate and allow natural light into the building or the home, which is, when picturing a cupola, many recall the small round cupolas like that at George Washington's Mount Vernon, this is a photo of that. This is, some of you might remember or might recognize it as this is an earlier photo of the Carson Funeral Home down on West Pleasant Street. And because of the design of this, that is not a cupola, that is a belvedere. Belvederes were larger, square, with more room to walk around. In the Italian style, these cupolas or belvederes were typically square, not round. And if they were big enough that a person can comfortably stand in and look out its windows, as many of them were, so it becomes a belvedere in that case. This is typically what you'll find in Italianate structures. So I said this is the Carson Fuller home house.
What was that used for?
It was one of the designs that was brought over from medieval, where they would have usually somebody stationed up there, or if this was on a house of a sea captain or something. Story is that his wife, and because so many ships sank, that's why they call it a widow's walk. She would stand up there and gaze out to see if she could see her husband's ship. And then even afterwards, she would gaze out to sea because she missed him. So that's how they got that moniker. Another one in Maquoketa is this one. It's a very plain. This is another house on West Pleasant Street. And it did have a belvedere or a widow's walk on top originally. This house is thought to have been built with California gold money, because the man who built it went to California, got a bunch of gold, came back, built this house, and did a lot of other big things. So that's where he got his money, according to the story.
Yes, the house I was born in.
So,
Why did they take those off?
well, like anything that sticks up in a windy place, they were hard to maintain. A lot of them leaked. And of course, if we can just go back one. So, who wants to climb up here all the time and reshingle that roof? So just when things got simpler, they just decided to tear them off and put a seal on it. So you don't know where the money was hidden, do you, that you were born in that house?
Maybe in the elevator.
Maybe in the elevator, could be. Yeah. Yeah, this was the first private home in Maquoketa that had its own elevator. And it was taken out early 1970s. Thor Holmgren took it out when they purchased the home.
Kind of was used to catch toys. I remember.
Catch toys, lock up kids, whatever. Some of the features inside this house, and I hope I've got these in the right order. Nope. Well, yes, I do. This is in the Carson house, and it features, some people call it a spiral staircase, but because it is so tightly spiraled, I guess, thank you, it's also known as a corkscrew staircase. And there is a similar one in another one of the houses that we're going to talk about today. And this staircase is made of oak, butternut, and mahogany with an intricate newel post. And maybe you can see the different parts of the newel post. And in some cases, and it's not with this case that I understand, the newel post was left kind of, they sat it in there, and then they used it kind of as a safe for money or papers or anything that they wanted to hide from a thief. It's not always that way. In this case, it's not, but in other structures there are. The house has hardwood floors, 8-foot-high doors trimmed with butternut, and they have a rosette. So this is a rosette right here. not a very fancy one, but it's there nonetheless. The rest of the first floor is also trimmed with butternut. This radiator was custom made to fit the curve right there. It's right by the staircase. But it was custom made to fit that curve.
Don, we took all of those radiators out of the house and have spray painted outside.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, that gold. Yeah, but they're really funny.
Yeah, no, that's not gold plated for anybody that thought that. They weren't originally gold plated. Mayberry's gold plated them when they moved in. Like most homes with radiation heat, slabs of marble were placed upon the top to help radiate heat. And if you can see right there, a lot of them, like this one, has edges that were kind of beveled or decorative. In other houses, they were just a square. They were just square, just a piece of marble that they laid on top. Okay, the round wood columns here are not original to the house, in that they were not original, excuse me, in the original architecture. They were added sometime 1900 to 1915 is usually the time when these appeared. And it has a very nice back porch, which has been used over the years for a lot of wedding parties, prom. This happens to be my son Cole's senior prom, and this was just his group, and they had their picture taken. And this is a two-story back veranda, so you can see this is one veranda, and then there was a sleeping porch out here. I understand there's a window that you kind of pushed out and you could sleep there. But then it also has, you can see right in there, is a lower veranda. So sometime when you're driving down Main Street, just kind of look over that way and you can see this porch. Current owners of the house are Nasser and Patricia Shahrivar. Patricia is an Iowa native. Nasser was born in Tehran, Iran. And they have been part of the art scene in this country for over 40 years. And more recently, they have become individual authors and screenwriters. So they had their grand opening. Some of you may remember this. So there are the covers of their books. This is Nasser's and this is Patricia's, and they are available online at the right time. Nasser is in the process of revising his, so that'll come out in a different edition pretty soon. But they've reimagined the Carson House as the Dart Manor, art gallery and bed and breakfast. So they're both artists, and they have very different styles. So this represents both of their styles.
Are their styles individually different, or just those two have different styles?
They individually have different styles, and the styles are completely different. Yeah, they are a very accomplished couple. If you get a chance to know them, I would advise it. The second house we're going to talk about is called the Stevens House Bed and Breakfast at 302 South Niagara. And this is an Airbnb. Dart Manor is a B&B because they stay there, they live there, they take care of their guests. This house is commonly known as the Stevens House and is currently owned by Josh and Brielle Reichs. And there's my famous pointer again. And that is where, so the house that you see here, this is 1873. That house was built in 1871, so that's the artist's conception of what that house looked like at that time. And you can see the tower and so on and so forth. And now we're going to go to a slide that is out of order. Those are the Reichs.
Related to the lawyer?
He is the lawyer.
He is the
Yep.
Ken?
What's that?
Ken writes?
No, not Reich, Reichs,
Oh, I see. I
like
see.
the third,
I see.
or Robert Reich.
Okay.
Okay. The house, as I mentioned, was built in 1871 at the corner of South Niagara and Maple Streets. And in case you were wondering, Maple Street was named after an actual maple tree that was at the end of the street. When they put the street through, they just ended the street, the maple tree, and didn't go any farther until the tree blew down. So the person that actually built the house was a man named by the name of Thomas Westlake Gilruth. And this is an ad for, he was a local attorney, he and his partner Madden, and they had their offices in what they called Willie and Son Store, or otherwise known as the Stone Store. And that's what that looked like. So they were upstairs here someplace. This is a 1870 view of that building. So
Where exactly is that at?
you asked that at just the right time.
We're all thinking.
Yeah, we're all thinking. Ah, okay.
See, it pays to pay people to ask questions at the right time. So, in this photograph, this is the Stone Store, and the man that built this building also built the mill out east of town. And then this is the back of Goodnow's Hotel, which was the first brick building in town. And was it the first brick building west of the Mississippi too? That was, but anyway, it's the first brick building in town. Bonnie remembers going to dances there. And
That's the belle of the ball.
that's why she's so excited about the muster. She gets to pull out all of her old dresses and rewear them. Okay, and this, it's kind of hard to see. This house, that's what the house looked like in 1874. You can see the tower and all of that. There are no porches there or anything yet. This was in the background of a picture of a house taken on West Pleasant Street where was the Harrison house. Sarah, can't think of her last name, lives there now. Jones, of course, such a unique name. But when the house that Sarah lives in was completed in 1874, they took a picture, and the camera was at such an angle that they caught this in the background. So, okay. So now, since this picture was taken in 1874, at the time this picture was taken, it was owned by this man, William M. Stevens, who bed and breakfast is named after. The Reichs family were very vocal about that William Stevens built the house and so on, until I said, not really, but that's fine. And they were happy to have their information corrected. So a picture of this man hangs in the house because he's the Stevens that the house is named after. He was a very prominent man in town, and he purchased this house from Gilruth on July 17, 1872.
President of the bank.
He He was president of the bank. He did a lot of things. So even though he purchased the house in July 17th, he didn't take possession of it until September 1st of that year. And Gilruth must have left town before that, as the last Gilruth and Madden ad appeared in the Jackson Sentinel September 7th, 1871. And this house in the newspaper was said to crown Mount Pisgah. And Mount Pisgah is a biblical reference for a very, very famous story for those of you that know your Christian Bible. And this is the verse where you can see Pisgah is highlighted there, but this is where God shows Moses the land that he will give to the Israeli people, but Moses is not allowed to cross into it. So that's where that reference came from. Why it came, I do not know. And there's Moses. He looks very sad, don't you think? And then this is a picture of the house in winter. You can see the tower, and by this time the kind of porch has been added and so on and so forth. The roof of the tower is supported by 3 large ceramic corbels that were at the corners, and those corbels are still in the house. The owners made sure that they got left there. So as far as locally, the Mount Pisgah is an area with undefined borders, and it reaches somewhere from this house south to where the Oregon House is by the high school, and over by the middle school where the Johnson House is, and then west. I don't remember how far west it goes, but there are a lot of houses that were said to crown Mount Pisgah. So that was the area of town that was christened Mount Pisgah for some reason. So this is the Oregon House. Probably recognize that. And the Mount Pisgah area did include another famous landmark, which is called the Joe Reynolds House or the Iowa Sanitarium. Some people called it the Haunted Mansion. Other people had another name for it. We won't go into that. This is when it was, no, it's not the sanitarium. This was, to date, the most palatial house ever built in the city of Maquoketa. It had 22 rooms. This is a picture of it as it was when it was the sanitarium. And out towards the end of this sidewalk, there were 2 stone lions that guarded that, because you got out on Summit Street and walked up. The lions are there. They look like the little soaps that you give kids, Flintstones or whatever, and they melt into a blob. That's kind of what they look like right now. But they are still there. This house had its own railroad spur, and their wealthy friends would come in from Chicago. The railroad spur terminated where the bus turnaround is, south of the high school, and they had loaded up their Cadillacs and their Continentals and brought them out on a train car from Chicago, and then they drove them up to the house. And there's a colorized version of the house when it was the sanatorium. And that green area right here is what was known as the Reynolds Estate. It was 27.5 acres inside the city limits at the time. The house wasn't built till 1883, something like that, so it wasn't there when this was made. And this is William Stevens again. This is from his, the little booklet they gave out at his funeral. And William Stevens was an industrious businessman and community leader, a real mover and shaker. He served not only on the city council, but he also handled the contracts and bonds for this building, which some of you may recognize. And he privately financed, out of his own personal resources that is, the first city well in the city of Maquoketa. So the city was large enough, they needed a well. Nobody wanted to buy bonds, nobody wanted, they were very cautious about it because what if they drilled it and failed? He said, to heck with it, put it there, and he did. And it's the well that he drilled, if I understand right, is the one that is by Mount Hope Cemetery. It's changed towers and things over the years, but that is at least about where it was. One person told me that it's about the same place, but the one that's there now was drilled much deeper because it would need to be for larger population.
Don,
Yeah.
what is that? I can't read it.
Oh, this is the high school grounds. So this tower faced north. So when you go to the north steps of the middle school, that's where this was. And if you go over to the other building, they have the bell from the tower, which when this building burned, the bell fell all the way down into the basement.
Oh.
But the pupils thought so much of this school and education that when the bell was found, when they got the they had the Manual Arts building built to the south, and they built a cabinet specifically to house that bell. And for a long time, the bell was in the north, when you walked in the north door of what was then the junior high school. I'm dating myself, went to junior high. It sat right inside the door as you went into the gym. And then after a while, it got moved, they got separated, but a few years ago they were reunited. So if you go down there, you can see a picture of this and the bell and the cupboard that the students built. They gave up their free time to build it. So that's how much they thought of education. A far cry from today. Besides owning the stone store, which he purchased, he also had a large, handsome retail block. And there was a furniture store in there, the post office, a hardware store, and then up on top you can see the Stevens block. And this was lost. If I understand correctly, it's kind of hard to decipher some of these pictures, in the 1917 fire on Main Street. So this would be where Hallmark was, for those of you that remember where Hallmark was. So that building, the Stevens block, would have been right in here, and I think it was on the green, in the green space, or it's where Main Street Plaza sits now, part of it.
But that was burnt one other time,
Right, yeah, that,
like
well,
2000 or,
2009, that same area kind of burned again. And that's what actually created the green space. The people who had offices inside Main Street Plaza, which was up at the time, were in there trying to get files and file cabinets and stuff out, and then part of the next building fell through the roof, and they said, "Heck with the files, I'm going to save myself."
that's right.
So, a lot of history right there in that green space area. All right. So this is a sketch of the Harris Opera House. Does that look familiar to anybody? This is where the Mexican restaurant is downtown now. Mhm. So Mr. Stevens also bought the Harris Opera House building. And this is what it looked like in 1900. And you can see it still looks the same. It has 1876 here, but up here it says Jackson County Bank. And so he bought that building to house his Jackson County Bank. which he founded in 1886.
We were remarking about the awnings looking kind of tough.
Yeah, they did look kind of tough. Awnings were made tough, but the wind, there wasn't a lot to block it, so they got a beating. So in addition to his store that was on Main Street, he also did what was unheard of at that time, but he established branch stores in Strawberry Point and Lanark, Illinois. So at the time he did that, doing that was completely unheard of. And that was Mr. Stevens. And now we move on to the third, which, can anybody guess? This is 418 West Pleasant Street. And it is currently known as Squire's 1882 Airbnb. And I went over when they had their open house, as a lot of people did, and it's very nice. It's furnished differently than what Nathan had it, but it's supposed to be. It's for what they wanted. And so there's my famous pointer again. And again, this house was not built in 1873 when this lithograph was done, but that's the corner where it would have eventually be built. And it was built at the private residence of these fine people, James Emery Squires and his wife Harriet. I think she has a very serene expression on her face. And they and their 5 children lived in this house. J.E. Squires was the bank president. And this house is a 2.5-story Queen Anne /stick /Eastlake style brick home. And they built this in 1882 with the exterior woodwork being of white pine. No expense was spared in the construction or furnishing of this house, including stained glass windows. Now I tried to find out if they were Tiffany. Do you know, Bonnie? They're not?
I don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't find a reference for it, but these are the main inside doors, stained glass windows, and you can see they're very intricate. This was taken from the stairway, which is why the light is hanging down in the middle. And this is from when Banowitz's owned it. So, and so this would have been very expensive at the time, the stained glass. And this is one of the things about the house and about the houses of wealthy people that told visitors and everyone else, I have enough money, I can waste it on this. That's what it was for. It's the same reason why we have mowed lawns now. That came from nobility in England who mowed acres and acres just to prove that they had enough money to waste it like that. The Squires family lived here for 60 years. So this is a photo of the house from inside the house. I took this picture when I was in the house. And this is the Squires' house with a car, and going by the car, I'm going to say 1920s. And so basically, the house hasn't changed. One thing I did notice was right here is an awning that they would pull out when they had rain or visitors or whatever, but they pulled it out and they pushed it back in. The woodwork of this house is of walnut, cherry, butternut, and pine. Excuse me. It was the first house in Maquoketa to have gas service and electric power. The house was also the first in town to have running water. Anybody want to guess how they got running water? There was a large reservoir on top of the house which caught rainwater and everything else that flew over. And when, through dry spells, in order to maintain the running water, there was a pump in the cellar. And it was the duty of the maids to pump that water from the cellar into the reservoir on the roof in such quantities that they could maintain that running water. They did not get overtime for this. They probably didn't even get a thank you. So this is from the 1904 souvenir edition. So that's what the house basically looked like in 1904. You can see the wrought iron fence is there at that time. And this is an interior kind of blueprint or drawing of what the inside of the house looks like. So given this Queen Anne and stick style of architecture, they have a central hall floor plan with 2 rectangular projecting bays, a 3-sided bay window, a kitchen addition on the back, and a hipped roof with intersecting gabled intersections. And I wanted to show some later pictures of Mr. and Mrs. Squires. Mrs. Squires, who died in the house at daybreak on New Year's Day 1925, was said to be, quote, a lady of rare refinement who had contributed much to the moral and social welfare of Maquoketa, unquote. And this is Squires Manor. This is a more modern photo. Over the years, the house was used first as a private residence, then converted into apartments in the 1940s, and remained so until restoration took place by the Banowitzes in 1990. The house was added to the National Register on April 20th, 1995, which stated the architectural and historic significance of this house is attributed to its being a well-preserved example of late 19th century domestic architecture. Notice the richly ornamented barge board, which is this part up here is called a barge board or a verge board. And the massive brick chimneys and the brick corbelling. And that just means the designs in the brick, like right there. It's not these, it's the 3D ones that they're talking about when they talk about that.
That window on top looks out of place.
Oh, yeah, it does. But there's a reason why it's there, from the interior standpoint. Okay, this is Squires Manor grand opening, and you can see Verl and Kathy and their son Benjamin, and the open house was 1991. So that's when Squires Manor had its grand opening. J.E. Squires was a merchant. He was a dry goods merchant downtown. And I don't know exactly what year this picture was taken. Do you remember, Bonnie?
I don't.
I think at this time Bonnie lived there. But this is where the Boyd Theater is, approximately, and there's Sanborn Building. So the Squires Building would have been right here, right on the corner. And this, so if this picture is of the right time, and J.E. Squires went to where this picture was taken, he would have seen this scene. And no doubt, even at any time, a lot of these buildings and the scene would have been very familiar to him.
What about the First Hotel? Is that?
First Hotel would be down this way farther.
Okay. It's a stately building.
Mr. Squires sold his dry goods business in 1885, And he had been elected president of, I don't know if anybody will recognize this building. This is the First National Bank, and this is a 1921 photo. So J.E. Squires died. This picture was taken 10 years after his death, but the bank probably hadn't changed a lot in that time period. Anyway, he was elected president of the First National Bank, and a position he held until 2 months before his death in 1911. Now, it was noted that there was no mortgage to pay for the construction of this house, which attests to Squire's wealth. And just to give you a clue to his wealth, between April 4th, 1911, which is when his probate was opened, till a year later, in March 8th of 1912, a period of about a year, the Squire's estate took in over $8,000, or about $270,000 in today's money. So, and given the tax structure and things, he got to keep most of that at that time. So they had quite a bit of money. He owned more than 12 properties around Maquoketa, lots in town as well as farms. And so when the probate was opened, Mrs. Squires requested $2,000 as an allowance until the estate was settled, of which she got a third. So the $2,000 back then would amount to about $6,700 today, and this is for a period of for about a year. So now this fine young man is Ralph Edward Stevens, and he has a connection directly to another house that we've talked about. Anybody want to guess which one? That's his name is Stevens. So Ralph Edward Stevens married Beulah Squires, and another daughter, Jenny, was married in the house, and they had her wedding dance. Well, they got married downstairs, and then they had her wedding dance up here in the attic, which is why that window was there, to let light into the attic, because Midwestern houses like this, they all had a ballroom, and they were all in the attic. So that's why that was there. Current owners of the house are Robert and Jeannie Abbott, or Janine Abbott. They operated as an Airbnb. And unlike the Banowitzes, the Abbotts have chosen to infuse the house with a modern flavor, enhancing the historical elements with comforts expected by 21st century travelers. So this is the previous picture was what it looked like when Banowitzes had it. This is what it looks like presently. You can see the big television on the wall. And it's interesting that they had this, because to get into this ballroom, they had to go up the stairs into the maid's room and then do a really sharp left to get to the stairway to go up to the attic. So imagine doing that with long dresses and corsets and all of that kind of stuff. That's why I don't wear a corset.
Or a long dress.
Or a long dress. Well, shh. This is the main. You walk in the front door, and this is what you see, and you can see the accoutrements are modern. They're not historic. So this is the room where you walk in the front door and turn to your left. They call this the drawing room. And it has a very cool fireplace. If you can see, it's carved and has these ceramic tiles. And then just back here is the dining room. This is the front door, the exterior front door from the inside. You can tell, thank you, you can tell that it has a lot of the etched glass that was a favorite at the time. And this is the dining room. This was taken from the stairway. Again, very modern flavor. The chandeliers are Abbott's addition. They were not there before. but it all blends very nicely. And then this is a current picture. So ends our brief tour of these historic homes, and we should all be grateful that they have been preserved, not only for us to enjoy now, but for future generations as well. Thank you.
Johnny, how did Mr. Squire, before he acquired all this real estate and bank building and so forth, how did he acquire his wealth?
He was a merchant.
A merchant?
Mm-hmm. I mentioned that they had lived in Lamont for a few years before they came to Maquoketa. He had a store up there, and everywhere that he was, he had a store or worked in a store, if you go back far enough. But that's how he acquired his wealth, was through the retail business.